5:03 a.m. Fluorescent light spilled down from the metal ceiling of Hangar 17, casting pale green streaks across the pearl-white surface of a $60 million Falcon 8X. The aircraft's smooth curves lay still, like a spacecraft stranded on the wrong planet. Every sound was swallowed by an eerie, unnatural silence. But inside that dormant machine, a 17-year-old boy was talking to himself. Elijah Grant lay on his back, body wedged beneath engine number 2 of the jet. His forehead was soaked in sweat, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep, but his fingers moved nimbly, slipping through narrow crevices, listening to each faint click, like the heartbeat of a living creature. He wasn't a senior engineer. He had no name tag, no degree, but if you asked any bolt on this Falcon, it might nod and say, "He knows me, intimately." He wasn't supposed to be here. Elijah knew that. He should have gone home at midnight. But after Merrick, the head of maintenance, left with the verdict, damage can't be resolved anytime soon, and after the other engineers packed up, only Elijah remained. He stood alone, staring at the aircraft like a puzzle still unsolved. And he wasn't willing to walk away, convinced the answer lay somewhere no one else had thought to look, a method no one believed made sense, except him. Because Elijah didn't learn to fix planes from school, he learned from his father. Deacon Grant, a former military pilot, a man who once touched the clouds with pride and fell because of a mistake that wasn't his. Elijah couldn't remember his father's face, but he remembered the way his grandmother told stories about midnight flights, about how his father once brought a B-2 bomber back with only one engine working. Elijah grew up on those stories, and on the old notebooks his father had filled in slanted, meticulous handwriting like treasure maps. He copied every page, memorized every line, and most of all, he believed in every detail. His hands tightened the torque wrench. 85.5 Newton meters, spot on. A quiet smile crept across his lips as he heard a soft click. It wasn't a grin of triumph. It was a confirmation, like a whispered, "I understand," between him and the machine. "Run the test one more time," Elijah said to himself. He slid out from the maintenance bay, wiping oil from his hands with an old cotton rag, once a t-shirt that belonged to his father. He squinted at the control screen. Readings were stable, sensors synced, no error messages. He typed in the command for simulation. The thrust reversers opened like delicate wings, then retracted smooth as wind gliding. Everything worked. That was when the hangar door creaked open. Elijah jumped to his feet. A man in a long coat stepped inside. Tall, broad-shouldered, polished leather shoes, no tools, no name badge. But he brought something else, an unmistakable presence. Sebastian Miles, Chief Executive Officer of Crown Dynamics, the true owner of the Falcon, and one of the most powerful men in global private equity. Elijah had seen him on CNBC, read about him in Forbes, but he had never imagined standing 3 meters from him, especially not soaked in oil and wearing wrinkled coveralls. Miles paused in the middle of the hangar. His eyes swept the space like radar, stopping at Elijah beside the control panel. "Davidson said someone's still working on my plane," he said, voice low and sharp. "I hope it's not you." Elijah drew in a breath and nodded. "Yes, sir. I reviewed the whole system. It's stable. You'll be able to take off on schedule." Miles frowned. His gaze traveled from Elijah's youthful face down to his grease-stained hands, then stopped. Around Elijah's neck, gleaming under the lights, was a silver chain. The pendant, a pair of wings, the symbol of a military pilot. The hangar seemed to fall completely silent. Elijah instinctively touched his chest. He'd never taken the necklace off. It was the only thing he had left from his father, and the first thing he touched every time he started work. A ritual. But Miles' reaction was unusual. He took half a step back. His face paled. "That necklace," he murmured. "Where did you get it?" Elijah's throat went dry. "My grandfather," he said softly. "Deacon Grant. He was a fighter pilot." Miles stood still, not surprised, shocked, as if he had just seen a ghost. "Deacon Grant," he whispered. "You're Deacon's grandson?" "Yes, sir." Miles stared at Elijah. Not just at him, through him, as though he were seeing a younger version of a man he once owed his life to. "You don't know this," Miles said, "but your grandfather saved my father's life over Kuwaiti airspace." In 1991, Elijah said nothing. He had never heard that story from his grandmother, only that his father and grandfather had once flown and were later grounded. Miles turned to the plane. "And now you're the one repairing the wings of my jet." No more words were exchanged. None were needed, because the 17-year-old boy, dismissed by the chief engineer, had just quietly room. Miles stood frozen in front of the aircraft like he was facing an airborne graveyard. The face usually seen in investor conferences, delivering bold speeches on systems thinking and revolutionizing private markets, now bore an expression Elijah couldn't name. Awe, nostalgia, regret. "Your grandfather waved his wings like that," Miles said softly, eyes still locked on the necklace, "right after shooting down a MiG chasing my father's jet. He didn't say anything, just waved those wings and disappeared into the clouds. And now I see those same wings. Again." Elijah didn't know what to say. He had never heard that his grandfather once saved an American pilot during the Gulf War. All his grandmother ever said was, "He used to fly, dreamed far, and was pulled back to earth without mercy." Miles exhaled slowly. "I still have the photo," he said. "My father kept it in his wallet, a black pilot standing next to a worn-out Phantom. Deacon Grant handwritten underneath. When my father passed, I kept it, but I never thought I'd see those wings again." Elijah stayed silent, only nodding. "I'll call Davidson," Miles said, his voice calmer but still shaken. "I want to review your training records. You're only 17? "Yes, sir. First-year intern. And you single-handedly fixed the aircraft my chief engineer called a pile of alloy that'll never fly?" "Well, I just tested a theory," Elijah said carefully. "I'd read in an old maintenance manual about a potential software miscalibration. The Falcon 8X still retains segments of code from its predecessor line. I suspected a signal loop error when oil pressure dropped unexpectedly." Miles chuckled, not mockingly, the kind of laugh you give when someone says something no one else ever dared to. "Where'd you learn this stuff?" "From my grandfather, from old simulations, and from the blind spots our current training system doesn't want to acknowledge." Miles nodded. He looked at the boy, skinny, dirty, but standing tall like someone who had just proven a theory the world had dismissed as wrong. "Elijah," he said, calling the boy's name for the first time, "did you know I played a part in ending Deacon Grant's flying career?" Elijah looked up, heart pounding. "No, sir. I was director of communications for Equinox Defense Aviation, the company that denied your grandfather a spot in the 1993 retraining program. His application was rejected by the board, but the internal memo was written by me. I wrote, 'Not suitable for brand image.' I remember every word. I thought I was protecting the company. Now I wonder who I erased." Silence. Miles stepped closer, now face to face with Elijah. "You have every right to be angry," he said, "but tonight, you saved my aircraft. Again, the Grant family saves the Miles family, and this time, I can't pretend I didn't see it." Elijah didn't respond. He touched the pendant again. The chill of the silver grounded him more than ever. 5 hours earlier. Rain poured over Los Angeles like the sky was testing the limits of the city's drainage system. Elijah hurried across the Auxiliary Air Bridge West airfield in a jacket too thin for warmth. In his ear, the internal radio blared, "Flight 486 from Seattle, delayed indefinitely due to subsystem error." He didn't need to hear more. He knew exactly what was happening, and he knew it was the Falcon. At the hangar, Chief Engineer Merrick stood with arms crossed, eyes cutting at him like Elijah had just stolen a wrench. "Go home, kid. Grown-up job here. But I said go. If you want to pass your FAA cert exam tomorrow, then scram." Elijah said nothing, but he didn't leave. At 11 p.m., he returned to the hangar, quietly slipping in after everyone else had gone. No one stopped him. No one cared. He booted up the systems, ran the checks, and did everything he believed was right. No pay, no audience. Just right. 5 hours later. Miles turned, dialing his phone. Call the crew. Tell them we're ready for departure. The plane's fixed. Thanks to the kid. Elijah remained still, saying nothing. He knew something had just shifted. And that's how a 17-year-old, without a degree, without status, without connections, brought a CEO to his knees before the past. Not with arguments, not with speeches, but with quiet action and a pair of silver wings long forgotten. The story is just beginning. 2 days before Elijah Grant repaired the Falcon 8X, he was sitting in a technical classroom on the ground floor of Building 5A at the local Aviation Institute, where the fluorescent lights were often dimmer than the future of most black interns. On the board was a diagram of an auxiliary thrust control system, full of tangled symbols that half the class didn't even bother to look at. But Elijah did. Not just looked, he was redrawing it into his notebook, not missing a single detail. Next to him, another intern was using a pencil to carve his girlfriend's name into the desk. You really believe someone like us will ever be allowed to touch a machine worth tens of millions? The guy asked, snickering. Elijah didn't look up. I don't need anyone's permission. I just need to understand how it works. Once you know it well enough, no one can stop you from fixing it. The teacher continued rambling about error code 34AV, but Elijah's eyes were locked on a tiny corner of the slide, where a line of code appeared that he'd never seen before. Flight code 57X. No annotation, no explanation. But he had seen it once, in his father's notebook. And he remembered clearly because his father had circled it in red ink and written a sharp warning in slanted block letters. Stop. Do not autocorrect. Causes reverse feedback. Elijah raised his hand. Sir, what is flight code 57X? The entire class turned around. The teacher, Mr. Grayson, frowned, then shrugged. Old stuff. That code hasn't been in official manuals since 2004. You don't need to worry about it. But what if a system wasn't updated or was built on an older framework? Grant, the teacher cut him off. You're not working for NASA. Here, we just learn what's required for the test. Elijah nodded, but deep down he knew. The thing they told him not to learn might just be the most important piece of the puzzle. That night, Elijah dug through his father's archive, a metal box his grandmother had locked up after Deacon Grant passed. With her permission, he opened it using the old key hanging on a nail in the kitchen. Inside were leather-bound notebooks with worn edges, filled with diagrams, handwritten notes, and comments only someone who'd lived with aircraft could have written. In the third notebook, between pages 47 and 48, he found the entry on flight code 57X. 57X, temporary override command used to intervene with the thrust adjustment system during sudden pressure signal drops. Only used in OS versions from 91 to 97, but secretly retained in the legacy core platform of the Falcon line. No one fixes it because no one remembers it exists. Previously caused reverse response errors during emergency landings. Must be manually disabled if re-triggered. He stopped. The final line was crossed out in red ink, but beside it was a symbol he'd never seen before. A hand-drawn triangle with the letters DW inside, short for Deacon Warning. 2 days later, at Hangar 17, when the Falcon was towed in with a fault reading "No thrust reverser signal received," Merrick was the first on the scene. He stood before the aircraft like a war-weary general. Elijah, step back. This is serious business. I just want to observe, sir, Elijah replied. Number not even observe. Elijah looked down at his shoes, then stepped back. But in his mind, the puzzle pieces began to move. Merrick flipped open his tablet and started scanning the system. Davidson, the head of maintenance, was also present. The two exchanged words in a dialect only those with over 15 years in the field could understand. But Elijah heard every word and understood every implication. Reverse feedback. Could be the actuator, Merrick concluded. Order a replacement, Davidson nodded. From Switzerland. At least 5 days. The owner's not going to like hearing 5 days. Then don't tell him. Send a private chopper so he can make his meetings. Elijah stepped forward. Sirs, if it's reverse feedback, it could be because flight code 57X hasn't been fully disabled. I read a similar case in early Falcon documentation. Merrick turned around. His gaze was a loaded weapon. What code? Where'd you learn that? In a 1994 maintenance manual, Elijah said quietly, there's a line about 57X causing interference if not manually shut down during thrust calibration, especially when the software's been updated without resetting the legacy foundation. Merrick laughed out loud. Legacy core? Do you even know what year that was phased out? This is a Falcon 8X, not some 2000s flight sim. Elijah, Davidson said more gently, you're standing in front of a $60 million bird. Don't joke around. I'm not joking, sir. I just think, if I'm right, it could save us 5 days. Merrick clapped Davidson on the shoulder. I'm done listening. I'm going to write the report. If anyone wants to test kid saves jet theories, go for it. He walked out. Elijah stood still, stone silent. Then Davidson, after a long pause, said, I can't pay you for night hours, but if you want to keep working, I'll let security know you have permission to stay. Elijah nodded. His eyes lit up like night beacons freshly charged. For the next 7 hours, he didn't sleep, didn't leave the computer, didn't eat, didn't check the time. He found a way to access the Falcon's Legacy Foundation through a secondary interface, something no engineer did anymore because it was considered unnecessary. But Elijah found code 57X, and just as his father's note warned, it was still there. An old fragment nestled in a forest of new data, causing interference during emergency input sequences. He disabled it, manually, reran the simulation, 96% improvement, rechecked the thrust system, perfect operation. Elijah bowed his head, not in celebration, but to whisper to himself, Thank you, Dad. By the next morning, when Miles walked into the hangar and witnessed the result, everything had changed. Elijah hadn't just fixed a jet. He'd touched a wound in a system that had never healed, a system that once buried a generation more skilled than the manuals they were forced to follow. And the name Flight Code 57X, a forgotten string of digits, was now a symbol for something no one had seen coming, the return of justice, delivered by the hands of a boy once deemed invisible. 11 p.m., all the engineers had gone home. Hangar 17 was bathed in a sickly white light, as if day and night had no meaning in this place. Everything was so quiet, you could hear the wind scraping across the metal roof, carrying with it dust, time, and truths no one wanted to speak aloud. Elijah Grant stood alone in the vast space, left hand holding a notebook, right hand resting on the auxiliary control panel, which had been almost entirely dismantled. His eyes were glowing, not from coffee, but from that unique kind of adrenaline known only to those who live to fix what others have already declared hopeless. There was no cheering, no eyes watching. If he succeeded, it would be, fine, the kid gets the job done. If he failed, he would bear the full blame. Elijah knew that better than anyone, and he stayed anyway. From the moment he stepped into the hangar, he knew no one would welcome him. When Davidson said, I'm not paying you for extra hours, Elijah just nodded. When Merrick walked away without even glancing back, he didn't flinch. He had no time for anger, because what he carried was a different kind of silence. Not submission, but preparation for a world that wasn't ready to acknowledge him. Elijah didn't come from an aviation family. His father, Deacon Grant, was the first in their bloodline to ever touch the sky. But when his license was stripped, not for any accident or technical error, but for reporting internal violations, the Grants were grounded once more. Elijah grew up surrounded by faded black and white photographs of his father standing next to fighter jets in torn flight suits, looking straight into the camera like he was daring the world to say no. Tonight, Elijah was continuing that unfinished dream, not by flying, but by focusing on the tiny components others deemed insignificant. He opened the system interface, typed in manual commands, scrolled through lines of code. His fingers moved so fast even he was surprised. The command appeared, 57X, active equals true. He bit his lip. One line of code that had made 3 senior engineers walk away, and a billionaire prepare to board a helicopter because his plane was beyond repair. He typed 57X, active equals false. Hit enter. It all happened in a second. But like typing in a life-saving password, the system didn't respond immediately. Elijah waited. Sweat dripped onto the keyboard. 1, 2, 3 seconds. Then, System override accepted. Instantly, the system recalibrated. Indicators shifted from orange to green. The line "No fault detected" appeared. Elijah exhaled, but he didn't celebrate. He still had to run a full simulation, perform manual checks. He knew all too well. In this business, one mistake could land you, and everyone on board, inside a metal coffin in the sky. He checked the pressure sensors. Passed. Checked the wing extension angles. Passed. He activated the dynamic model. Wings opened, opened, closed. Smooth as if they'd just been factory installed. Elijah closed his eyes. In his mind, his father was waving from the cockpit of a hazy old Phantom jet. No sound, but he could hear it. He whispered, "I did it, Dad." 4:30 a.m. Elijah sat beside the Falcon like a silent sentinel. On his lap was his notebook. Beside him, an old water bottle. His phone had been turned off since 2 a.m. because he didn't want to be interrupted. Or maybe because he didn't want anyone to know he was still here. That's when Miles appeared. But before he walked in, a camera had already captured Elijah typing those final commands. And on the other end of that surveillance feed, Miles, seated in a private airport lounge with an espresso and a stock chart glowing on his tablet, saw something no one else did. Not the way Elijah worked, but the way he touched the silver pendant before fixing the system. That small gesture, a wordless prayer, made Miles pause mid-sip. He zoomed in on the necklace. His heart raced as he recognized the familiar wings, and suddenly the stock chart no longer mattered. Miles stood, ordered security to open the hangar, and drove there immediately. When he stepped inside, Elijah was still running final checks. The light revealed the sweat soaking the back of his collar, but he didn't turn around immediately. He finished the simulation cycle, then stood up and turned to face the most powerful man he'd ever met. "Davidson said someone's still working," Miles said. "Yes, sir. I just completed the recalibration. The jet is stable." Miles said nothing. His eyes dropped to Elijah's chest, to the silver chain. And from that moment, everything changed. The conversation between them, already told in the previous part, was more than an encounter. It was a moment where two generations connected through a forgotten symbol. A CEO who once ordered Deacon Grant's name erased from the system was now standing before the grandson of the man he had dismissed and was forced to face the one thing he could no longer deny: presence. Elijah had fixed the plane, but more importantly, he had forced the system to acknowledge someone it had once chosen to erase. That morning, Davidson walked into the hangar with a skeptical look. Merrick arrived too, coffee in hand and arrogance in tow. But when they saw Miles standing beside Elijah, not angry, not interrogating, but listening, they stopped in their tracks. "The plane ready?" Davidson asked cautiously. "Elijah says it is," Miles replied without turning. "And I trust him." Merrick opened his mouth but was cut off by a single look from the CEO. "Elijah also just informed me about error code 57X, something none of my senior engineers seem to remember. Strange, isn't it? The intern knows what the maintenance department forgot." Davidson swallowed hard. Merrick flushed red. "It's fine," Miles continued. "You don't need to explain. Just remember this. From now on, all technical oversight for my jet goes through Elijah Grant. If anyone feels that's inappropriate, I'll gladly move my maintenance contract elsewhere." The air thickened like cabin pressure at 30,000 feet. 5:45 a.m. Elijah stepped out of the hangar. His hands trembled, not from the cold, but from the feeling of being seen, for the first time, not as some poor black kid from East LA, but as a real engineer. An invisible shift, no pay, no applause, no certificate. But it was a shift that opened a door he never thought was meant for him. Sunday morning, on the living room wall of 3125 Gardenia Street, sunlight streamed through faded curtains, casting soft beams onto a small wooden table where an old tin box sat. The box's olive green paint was chipped, and one corner was dented, as if it had once fallen from great height or been clenched tightly in a handful of tears. Eleanor Grant, 76 years old, surviving on her pension and sheer resolve, sat on the sofa, both hands gripping the tin box like she was holding the past itself. Next to her was Elijah, his face still puffy from a near-sleepless night. He hadn't shared many details, just one sentence. The plane flies now, and Miles saw the wings. That was all. And somehow it was already too much. Eleanor opened the box. Inside were yellowed papers, 3 photographs, a miniature military uniform, and a silver necklace identical to the one around Elijah's neck, except this one had a broken wing. "Your father left behind 2 sets of wings," she said. Her voice was low and calm, but her eyes shimmered. "One he wore when flying. The other, he gave to me when he proposed. The one you're wearing, that was yours. It's the last thing I put on you the day your parents passed." Elijah gently touched the necklace on his chest. He remembered that day. Everything was a blur. The funeral, strangers, his grandmother's hand gripping his shoulder, and that cold pendant placed around his neck like a compass for the rest of his life. "But you never told me about Grandpa," Elijah said. "You never told the whole story." Eleanor was silent. Then slowly, as if unlocking a sealed chamber in her memory, she spoke. "Because some things people aren't always ready to hear. But today, I think you need to know." In 1991, Deacon Grant was one of the rare black pilots appointed to lead reconnaissance missions in the Gulf. Not because the military was short-staffed, but because they couldn't deny his skill. Deacon wasn't a prodigy, but he never made mistakes. In over 327 flight hours, not a single technical incident ever occurred on his watch. And during his final mission, he saved an F-17 that had taken a hit by flying his old Phantom into enemy fire, igniting his afterburners to draw attention, and forcing a reverse maneuver to exit the kill zone. It wasn't in the mission plan, and it never made it into the reports. But the man he saved, William Miles, was the father of Sebastian Miles, the future CEO of Crown Dynamics. "Your father never spoke of it," Eleanor said, "not because he wasn't proud, but because he knew, no matter how many hours he flew, no matter who he saved, when he came home, he'd still be denied." Elijah didn't respond, but inside his heartbeat echoed like the engine of that old Phantom his grandfather once piloted. "When he got back," she continued, "he applied to commercial airlines. They all turned him down. Why? Not aligned with our brand image? Some were blunt. Passengers aren't used to black pilots. Others were more polite. We're concerned about your safety internally." "And Miles?" Elijah asked. "Did he ever step in?" Number Sebastian was still young, and his father, the one who'd been saved, sent a thank you. A letter, but no job offer. They thought a photo together was enough to honor him. But they didn't understand. Your grandfather didn't want honor. He just wanted to keep doing the job. Eleanor pulled a letter from the box. The paper was yellowed with time. The handwriting neat, signed, William Miles. Its message was simple. Gratitude, a promise to stay in touch. But nothing more. "And after that?" Elijah asked. "Your grandfather opened a small plane repair shop, lived quietly, until he was in a car accident in 2006, the same year your mother, his youngest daughter, died. After that, I never saw him smile again." Elijah looked again at the wings on his chest, glinting in the light, but now no longer just a symbol. They were remains, evidence, a mark of all that had been erased. "I want to tell this story," Elijah said, "to Miles, to others." "You can," Eleanor said, "but telling isn't enough. You have to do something with it." "I fixed the Falcon, but that was only the beginning." That afternoon, Elijah went to meet Miles, who had asked to see him again the next day. The meeting took place at the regional office of Crown Dynamics in downtown Los Angeles. But this time, Elijah wasn't wearing technician gear. He wore a white shirt, black trousers, and the silver wings hung outside his collar. Miles entered without speaking at first. Then he pointed at the wings. "The last time I saw those was 1991, he said. "Do you know," Elijah spoke, "that your father promised to keep in touch and never did?" Miles sat down, his expression softening. "I know. I reread that letter after yesterday, and I know that promise wasn't enough. It never was. But you can do something, now." "Elijah," Miles said slowly, "I want to establish a scholarship, named after your grandfather, for people like you, people who don't wait for permission." Elijah sat still. Not just that, Miles continued. I want you to be the first recipient and the one to choose who comes next. No, Elijah shook his head. I'll accept, but on one condition. The scholarship won't be named after my grandfather. It will be called The Wings That Shouldn't Fit, because people like me, we're told those wings don't belong to us, but we wear them anyway, and we fly. Miles smiled. Agreed. 1 week after Elijah Grant successfully recalibrated the Falcon 8X and made CEO Sebastian Miles publicly acknowledge him in front of the entire Crown Dynamics maintenance division, everything changed. Not with grand declarations. There were no banners, no TV interviews, just an email. Subject, Wings Initiative, Internal Review and Pilot Program, from Sebastian Miles to engineering staff. CC, Board Oversight. Body beginning next week, Crown Dynamics will launch a new internal pilot program titled the Wings Initiative, a training and technical development effort based on merit equity, not background. The goal of this program is to identify, support, and elevate individuals with exceptional capabilities who have not yet been formally recognized by the system. The program's first technical advisor will be Elijah Grant. He has proven that not everything requires a certificate to set a new standard. SM. At Hangar 17, Merrick read the email on his phone. His face turned cold, as if he'd just swallowed a loose screw. That kid, the technical advisor? He growled to Davidson. Davidson didn't respond. He was still thinking about the previous night when Miles had come to see him personally and issued a condition. If I hear anyone in this department say, that black intern again, our 18-year maintenance contract will be terminated within 72 hours. At Crown Dynamics' central office, Miles sat with the strategy team. We need 3 partner tech universities ready to sign on so the scholarship program can begin next semester, he said. A senior advisor spoke up. Sir, internal chatter is heating up. Some veteran staff say the kid's just a PR stunt. A branding trick. Miles didn't blink. If a PR stunt can fix a Falcon 8X with nothing but a notebook, then maybe we need more stunts like that. The room fell silent. Meanwhile, at home, Elijah was quietly sitting in his room. On the desk lay a growing stack of scholarship applications. In just 3 days, over 80 submissions had arrived in the temporary inbox of the Wings That Shouldn't Fit. From boys and girls who had never been seen, never thought aerospace engineering was for them. One letter from Cleveland read, I got suspended once for fixing the school bus without asking, but if I hadn't tightened the brakes, it would have slid down a hill. They called me a troublemaker, but now, maybe I wasn't wrong. Elijah read the line, then drew a line through the applicant's self-disqualification and wrote, Review immediately. At the Crown Dynamics board meeting, the CFO raised a concern during a closed session. How much are we investing in this program? Miles replied without hesitation. 1/4 of the HR development budget, for now. For a 17-year-old intern? For the future. For a boy who fixed a plane our entire maintenance division gave up on. Another board member interjected, but if this fails, if we set the precedent that anyone can just break the rules? Miles leaned back, looking each person in the eye. If the old rules made us lose people like Deacon Grant, then maybe the rules need to change. I'd rather risk reform than let another generation vanish into the shadows. In East LA, Eleanor Grant stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her hair, preparing for the scholarship launch event. Elijah helped fasten her brooch, then paused. Do you think Grandpa would be proud? He wouldn't say so, she smiled. He'd just give your shoulder a pat, like the day you first learned to read blueprints. Elijah chuckled, but in his eyes was a different altitude. Not a physical one, the altitude of a legacy, ready for takeoff. At the launch event, there was no elaborate stage, just a black and white photo at the center of the room. Deacon Grant standing between 2 Phantom jets, flight suit torn at the shoulder, helmet in hand. Miles stepped forward and gave a brief speech. There are people who never need to be celebrated to become symbols, and there are wings that don't need to fit to be deserved. He turned to Elijah. This young man today hasn't just changed how we view engineering. He's changed how we see ourselves. The room fell silent. Then everyone stood, No thunderous applause, just eyes, every single one. A silent thank you. After the event, Elijah stood alone on the rooftop of the building. The sky was darkening. The city lights were coming alive. His silver necklace shimmered under the moonlight. Beside him was Miles. You know, Miles said, I used to think power was about controlling what takes off and what gets grounded. But now I realize real power is the courage to let someone fly, even when they're not on the flight path you designed. Elijah nodded. And sometimes, he said, they'll fly higher than you ever imagined. Not everyone is happy when someone else's wings take flight. 4 weeks after the launch of the Wings That Shouldn't Fit scholarship, Elijah Grant walked into his shift at Hangar 17 under an odd silence, still as stone, but filled with stares sharp as knives. There are some things people don't say, but you can feel them, clear as scratched metal. Hey, technical advisor, smirked Vaughn, an older engineer with graying hair. Planning to break another repair record tonight? Or just here to offer ancestral wisdom? Elijah didn't respond. He quietly made his way to his station, now renamed Grant Bay, and began checking the latest system reports. Everything looked fine, except for a small gray warning at the bottom of the screen that made him frown. Unauthorized config file, 3:14 a.m. 3:14 a.m. Elijah wasn't on site, neither was Davidson, and this server had dual-layer encryption. Who had accessed it? He pulled the log file. There was a trace of entry, but the IP address had been masked. The code format was too clean, too technical, like whoever did it had deliberately left a clean trace. No fingerprints, not an error, a breach. And this time, the saboteur didn't want to disrupt the system. They wanted to prove Elijah Grant didn't deserve to be where he was. The next morning, an incident occurred at Hangar 4, home to the Wings Initiative's training aircraft. A Gulfstream slipped off the balance system during a routine check. No injuries. But mechanics claimed someone had misaligned the auxiliary stabilizer. All fingers pointed to Elijah, even though he'd never touched that Gulfstream. In a closed-door meeting, Sebastian Miles reviewed a report from the base operations chief. This is the second error in 2 weeks involving components Grant previously suggested recalibrating. Any proof? Miles asked, eyes fixed on the screen. Nothing direct, but another intern, Troy, said he saw Elijah near the system the night of the malfunction. Troy, the same one whose scholarship recommendation Elijah rejected? Yes. Miles stayed still, tapping the table softly. No hasty action. We're scanning the full system. If someone's playing dirty, I want clear proof. At the same time, Elijah knocked on the door of a stranger's home. Her name was Cassie Rhodes, a former jet propulsion engineer at Crown who had left after technical disagreements. She welcomed Elijah in, poured him ginger tea, and got straight to the point. They're setting you up. How do you know? Because I used to be them, Cassie said, her eyes steady. In 2019, when I found a silent error code buried inside Falcon's OS, I submitted a report. The next day, someone attached my name to a complaint about reckless behavior, and I was reassigned to parts storage. 6.1. Elijah clenched his fists. They don't like anyone stepping outside the lines, Cassie said. But you didn't just step out. You're redrawing the whole map. She handed Elijah a hard drive. This has system update logs for the jet platform from 2015 to 2022. Plenty of code they forgot to log on the central servers. You can use it to trace the last unauthorized code change. Thank you, Elijah whispered. I didn't know anyone was on my side. Cassie smiled. There are. Just, no one stands in the spotlight. Not in this field. That night, Elijah returned to his station. He used the hard drive to compare the original code base with the tampered one. He discovered a small change in line 4983. An IF condition had been flipped to else, effectively disabling the balance system during low-impulse startup, invisible to the naked eye, but enough to misalign an aircraft's structure during takeoff. He printed the line of code, then rewrote every line by hand, not because he needed to, but because this was living evidence. The next day, Elijah went to Miles, not through email, in person. You said if someone's playing dirty, you wanted proof, Elijah said, placing a folder on the desk. Here's the flipped code. Here's the original. Here's the unauthorized access timestamp. And this, he pulled out his phone, played a security clip. Troy using another intern's security badge to enter Hangar 4 at 3:14 a.m. Is who did it? Miles didn't speak for 30 seconds. Then he stood, opened the conference room door. Call an internal board meeting this afternoon and notify Troy. As of now, he is no longer employed by Crown. That afternoon, in a confidential meeting, Miles presented the evidence. Elijah stood silently, notebook in hand, saying nothing. When one director asked, "How did we let a kid expose a veteran engineer?" Miles simply replied, "Because the veterans forgot how to do the right thing, and he hasn't." By the end of the day, Miles walked out and found Elijah waiting in the lobby. "You think this gets easier after today?" he asked. Elijah shook his head. "Number. But at least I know I'm not walking the wrong path." Miles smiled faintly. "I used to think my father was naive for trusting someone like Deacon Grant, but now I realize he was the only one who saw the right flight path." Elijah nodded. "And now, it's our turn not to look away." Monday, 8 a.m. Crown Dynamics, 42nd floor, where the elevators require fingerprint scans and the boardroom has no windows. The oval conference table gleamed with polished mahogany. The graphite leather swivel chairs were perfectly aligned. A row of briefcases lined the edge of the table, as if everything in this room had been programmed for one thing only: no deviation. And today, someone unprogrammed was about to walk in. Elijah Grant, 17 years old. No college degree, no engineering title, only a silver necklace and a portfolio just thick enough to make people hesitate before ignoring him. He stood before the frosted glass door, inhaled, adjusted his collar, then knocked twice, not slowly. "Come in," Miles's voice called from inside. He pushed the door open. The air was cold and formal. 4 people already sat waiting: Miles, 2 board members, and a woman Elijah had never seen before. Short silver hair, wire-frame glasses, eyes sharp as X-rays slicing straight through the chest. "Elijah Grant," Miles introduced, "technical advisor, and the individual who identified the falsified code in last week's Gulfstream incident." The woman spoke. "Do you know why we invited you here?" Elijah replied, "I believe it's because I did something that should have been handled by a team of senior engineers in the first place." A beat of silence. Then one of the directors smirked. "Bold. But boldness isn't always welcome in rooms like this." Elijah looked directly at him, calm. "Honesty is always the clearest language when flight safety is at stake." Miles gave a faint smile. "All right, today isn't about evaluating Elijah. It's about discussing a proposal." He opened the projector. The first slide appeared. Wings Initiative, Phase 2, Decentralized Technical Leadership. The concept, Miles explained, is to integrate select unofficial technical advisors, like Elijah, into expert teams as equals to lead engineers. "He doesn't have a degree," one director objected. "Are we restructuring the system for one upstart?" "Not because he's an upstart," Miles answered, "but because while we analyzed, he resolved." The woman with silver hair, now introduced as Dr. Arlena Quinn, head of systems evaluation and professional ethics, leaned back. "Grant," she said, "are you prepared to walk us through exactly how you detected, analyzed, and verified the code anomaly? This time, as if presenting to an FAA review panel?" Elijah nodded. He didn't reach for a laptop, only opened his notebook. He began. His voice was clear, each step logical, just technical enough for insiders to respect, just coherent enough for non-engineers to follow. 12 minutes passed. No one interrupted. And when he finished, Dr. Quinn jotted down a single note. "You didn't find the bad code. You understood the intention to hide it." Elijah didn't deny it. "The frightening part," she continued, "isn't that you were able to do it. It's that so few people here believe someone like you should be able to." Silence. Miles looked around. "The only question now is, do we keep defending the old process, or do we rebuild the process to defend the right people?" 3 days later, Elijah received a private email from Dr. Quinn. Subject, off-record grant. "If available, meet me tonight in room 10, G, 6th floor, Research library. No minutes, no miles. Just what hasn't been said. He arrived on time. Room 10G was small, dimly lit, soundproofed. Dr. Quinn was already seated. No files, just 2 cups of tea. Grant, she began, do you know where you're standing? Elijah Grant, temporary advisor, code anomaly whistleblower. No, she said. I mean, you are at the crossroads of 3 forces. She placed 3 chess pieces on the table. A black piece. Those who believe the system should remain as is, who see people like you as the exception, not the precedent. A white piece. Those who want to use your story to decorate their own. Proof the organization knows how to listen. A silver blue piece. A very small group who truly want change. But they're on the margins, and they're watching you. Elijah looked at the 3 pieces. He didn't touch any. And me, she said, I've stood in all 3 places. He gave a small smile. Where are you now? I want to know, where do you choose to stand? Elijah answered without pause. Where no piece is placed yet. Because if I step on someone genuinely talented but unseen, then even winning the game won't be worth it. Dr. Quinn smiled. Good, very good. 3 weeks later, at Crown Dynamics headquarters, Elijah was appointed as a provisional member of the Technical Innovation Council, a group that, until then, had never included anyone under 30. That same week, Elijah received a letter from Bailey Academy, a technical high school in Chicago, requesting his help in redesigning their curriculum based on the Wings model. And that very same week, a leaked internal memo surfaced. A group of senior engineers had signed a petition opposing the non-credentialed engineering track, demanding budget cuts. The board's response? Miles issued just 7 words in his public reply. You don't fear him, you fear replacement. Everything began with an ink stain, a small blot of ink, smudged near the margin of an old letter written by Deacon Grant. Something Elijah only noticed by chance while reorganizing the archive box with Grandma Eleanor on a drizzly March morning. He was about to seal the letter in a moisture-proof sleeve, but his eyes paused. Not on the main body of text, but on a faint marking, a sort of overwritten signature, unclear, near the edge of the paper. Grandma, Elijah asked, did anyone else ever write on Grandpa's letter? Eleanor took a magnifying glass, frowned. The letter C, maybe a J or a Z, but definitely not your grandfather's handwriting. Elijah switched on a UV light and saw. It was fluorescent ink. He brought the letter to Dr. Quinn. They sat in silence in the storage room on the 4th floor, one of the only spaces without security cameras. Someone modified this letter, Dr. Quinn concluded, and intentionally left behind a private signal. Why? Maybe for someone to find, but clearly not too soon. Can it be traced? Elijah asked. She nodded. If it came from a coded military typewriter system, we'll need to find a match from the off-catalog library. The off-catalog library, where only records never formally classified into civilian systems exist, meaning they needed someone who'd been there. Dr. Quinn picked up her phone. I need to call an old acquaintance. He used to work in the Air Force Documentation Division. He loves Cuban cigars and hates Zoom. 3 days later, in a home in Virginia, Elijah met Carlisle Jennings, 87 years old, former head of military correspondence classification, responsible for archiving soldiers' personal letters from 1950 to 1990. He looked at the letter, pulled out a wooden-handled magnifier, and chuckled. A kid who knows how to use UV to chase ghost ink, he's either a spook or someone who really loves the one who wrote this. Elijah Grant, he introduced himself. I'm Deacon Grant's grandson. Carlisle paused, looked closer at the letter. I handled 6 letters from your grandfather, he said. 3 from the Nevada training base, 2 from Kuwait, and 1 he never sent. This one. Elijah's breath caught in his throat. How do you know? Because he asked me to keep it. He wrote it the night he was denied re-entry into the training program. Wanted to write to 2 old friends, but didn't know where to send it. He signed it with a D, and someone else added to it later. Could have been a reply. Could have been a cipher. Were there others like him? Elijah asked. Carlisle smiled faintly. There were, two others. They used to call themselves the Three Wings. In the 1970s at Nellis Training Base, three black men, Deacon Grant, Cecil Jerome, and Zachary Lane, became known as the Three Wings because they always trained in formation and consistently scored perfect marks. They weren't arrogant. They called themselves that because they felt that only together could they survive. Cecil was a genius with avionics. Zachary had the fastest reflexes I'd ever seen, Carlisle said. But all three were unofficially suspended in 1975 for incompatibility with integration strategy. What does that mean? It means they were too good and not easy to manage. After the suspension, Deacon returned home. Zachary disappeared from transfer lists. No one knew where he went. And Cecil was said to have entered an unidentified civilian role. You think any of them are still alive? Elijah asked. Carlisle thought for a moment. Maybe one. And if you find him, you won't just be reclaiming your grandfather's name. You'll be resurrecting an entire team that was erased. Elijah began the search. He combed through U.S. Air Force flight records from 1972 to 1978. The name Zachary Lane disappeared in mid-1976, but in an anonymous technical report from 1983, at an unlisted Blue Corps Airlines maintenance facility in Arizona, a note about dynamic balance systems was signed ZL. He found it. Zachary Lane was living in Tucson, Arizona, under a new name, Zach L. Morrison, an independent mechanic. Elijah didn't tell anyone. He bought a ticket, flew alone. At a small garage near a Tucson highway, Elijah found a man repairing a pickup truck, salt and pepper hair, hands steady and solid as stone. Are you Zach Morrison? The man looked up, eyes sharp, then softened. You brought the wings. Elijah froze. How did you know? Because I used to wear them, and I know when they come back. Zachary Lane, now Zach, looked at Elijah the way one might look at their younger self. You're Deacon's boy? I'm his grandson. Zach closed his eyes, as if swallowing a sigh that had taken decades to build. I always thought I'd be the one to find you, but it turns out you found me. Zachary explained. After he was stripped of flight privileges, he was offered a transfer to an elite mechanical division. But when he refused to sign a confidentiality clause, he was discharged for behavioral misalignment. And Cecil? Elijah asked. Zach went quiet, then spoke. Cecil didn't transition roles. He was forced out. He opened a small auto repair shop in New York. In 1993, he passed away. Heart failure. No one came to the funeral except one person. Deacon Elijah felt the air leave his lungs. They were unbeatable together, but the era didn't want men like them to exist as a unit. Zach stood up, opened a worn drawer, pulled out a small wooden box. Inside, a pair of tarnished silver wings, and a letter unsent. Deacon wrote this, but he never had the courage to mail it. Elijah read it. At the bottom, the signature, D, for the wings we weren't allowed to keep. Not every door is closed because it was forgotten. Some are closed because someone wanted them never to open again. And on the outskirts of Carson City, Nevada, at an old Air Force base that once served as a premier tactical flight training center in the 1970s, there stood a building erased from official maps since 1984. Hangar 12. No maintenance code, no listed manager, no access schedule. Only a faded, tilted sign hanging over a cracked concrete path. Do not enter. Archival status. DO6. And in the desert wind, which whipped dust against the peeling walls, Elijah stood there, his silver necklace catching the burnt gold sunlight, staring at a 200-kilogram steel door like it was daring him to try. Zachary Lane had brought him here. This was the last place we flew together, he said. The final time, before they called us into a room, revoked our pilot cards, and said one sentence. Your services are no longer required. Elijah stood silent. Zachary continued. I came back once, in 1992, but I couldn't open it. I was afraid of what I'd see, of what might still be here. Elijah didn't speak. He just pulled on his gloves, placed his hand on the rusted lock, and pushed. The door opened. Inside, Hangar 12 was a graveyard of time, moss-covered concrete walls, torn tarps over old training modules, and at the center, three phantom cockpit simulators arranged like a bird in flight. Elijah walked slowly. Each step echoed, like a footprint someone else had left behind 4 decades earlier. Zachary followed, his eyes fixed on a corner of the room. "There," he whispered. "That's where Deacon carved 'never broken, only denied' into the wall." Elijah shined his light. The words were faint, but still there, cut deep with a knife, now layered in dust. He touched the carving, not to erase it, but to feel it. He kept walking. In the far corner of the hangar stood an old file cabinet, locked, but below it, a displaced ventilation grate. Elijah crouched, pulled. A sealed package bound in wire slid out. Zachary held his breath. That's the thing I couldn't bring myself to touch back then. Inside, a copy of the 1974 training records, missing from all official archives. The names Deacon Grant, Cecil Jerome, and Zachary Lane appeared, each marked in bold red, reviewed under Order 4477, subject to suppression. Elijah frowned. He pulled out his phone, sent a photo to Dr. Quinn. Her reply came 4 minutes later. 4477 equals Flight Culture Integrity Program, designed to prevent internal conflict after the wave of black service member rights protests, 1971 to 75. Elijah asked, "Prevent how?" Dr. Quinn, "By redefining team compatibility. Those deemed culturally incompatible were marked for quiet removal. No record, no appeal." He read it again. Each word felt like a fresh wound in his family's memory. "They stayed silent," Elijah said to Zachary. "But I can't be." Zachary nodded. "You shouldn't, and you're not alone." He pulled a USB drive from his jacket pocket. "Cecil gave me this. It's an audio recording from our last night in Hangar 12, the night they called us in." Elijah took it, his heart pounding. That night in his hotel room, he played the file. 3 men's voices filled the room, low, controlled, but laced with quiet fury. "Deacon, if this is your decision, I want it in writing." Unfamiliar voice. "Not necessary. This is a direct order. Cecil, because we're black, or because we scored highest in the exams?" Voice. "We can't allow a group like yours to become the model. It's not the right time." A long pause. Zachary. "Then when exactly is the right time, sir?" No reply. Elijah turned off the recording. His eyes welled up. He had never seen it so clearly. The past hadn't just been forgotten. It had been buried alive. And now it was being unearthed by someone carrying the wings of that buried generation. 2 days later, Elijah sent the audio file, the documents and photos of Hangar 12 to Miles, along with a handwritten note. "If you truly want honor, start with truth." These names were erased. "Bring them back." Miles didn't respond immediately, but 3 days later, at an internal press conference, he stood before the entire staff of Crown Dynamics. "Today we acknowledge a forgotten truth, that in 1975, 3 engineers, 3 black pilots, Deacon Grant, Cecil Jerome, and Zachary Lane, led tactical flight training performance at Nellis Air Base. But they were never allowed to continue flying. Crown Dynamics will restore Hangar 12 and rename it the Grant Jerome Lane Institute of Technical Aviation. We are not doing this to seek forgiveness. We are doing this so we never forget. Not every plane needs to take off to fly. Some flights only need to be remembered, and that's enough to lift the soul off the ground." On the morning of April 27th, at the Nevada base, where Hangar 12 had been restored as the Grant Jerome Lane Institute of Technical Aviation, an unprecedented ceremony was about to begin. Elijah Grant, dressed in a gray flight jacket embroidered with a crest of 3 interlocked silver wings, stood beside a restored Phantom F-4 training jet. His gaze never left the rear cockpit seat. "You ready?" asked Zachary Lane, now going by Mr. Zach Morrison, his hand resting gently on Elijah's shoulder. Elijah nodded, but his voice dropped. "Ready, but not sure I'm worthy." Zach smiled. "Back in the day, your grandfather said the exact same thing." The memorial ceremony began at 900 hours. No LED screens, no grand fanfare, only a runway, a sculpture of 3 wings meeting midair, and rows of white chairs draped in cloth, where family, old comrades, and those who had never been publicly named sat together for the first time, as if a long overdue apology was finally being offered. Late, but sincere, Sebastian Miles stepped forward. His speech was brief. Truth doesn't come from systems. Truth comes from those who refuse to stay silent. Today, Crown Dynamics is not hosting a celebration. We are offering an acknowledgement. Three men, Deacon Grant, Cecil Jerome, Zachary Lane, were once good enough to fly into history. Instead, they were pushed out to the margins of record. Elijah Grant reopened that record, and today we will send them to the skies on a flight they were never allowed to take. The Phantom, now renamed GJ-1, was repainted in silver and navy blue. On its fuselage, three names were engraved: Grant, Jerome. Lane Elijah climbed into the back seat, shoulders strapped in. In the front sat Lieutenant Colonel, retired, Lyra Hansen, a former Air Force flight instructor from Tucson, now the pilot of this symbolic mission. Zachary did not fly with them. He stood on the ground holding an old flight log, each page a battle between skill and prejudice. The engines rumbled. The runway cleared. As the jet's wings sliced through the desert wind, Elijah's hands clenched the straps. But his heart wasn't afraid, because this flight wasn't about conquering the sky. It was about restoring what should have belonged to them all along. The GJ-1 circled above the desert sky. No aerobatics, no spectacle. Just one loop, set to a precise altitude encoded in their 1974 flight model, 13,970 feet. The average height Deacon, Cecil, and Zach had flown together that year. At the apex, a soft tone pinged through the system. Elijah keyed the mic. His voice echoed over the radio. On behalf of those who were once silenced, today we have been heard again. On behalf of those whose names were once erased, today we have been called back. And on behalf of my grandfather, Mr. Deacon Grant, the man I've always longed to understand more than myself, today I fly the unfinished part of your journey. A deep silence followed. Then from the front seat, Lyra Hansen responded, Permission granted. Legacy airborne. When the plane landed, no one clapped. Everyone stood and removed their hats in unison. Zachary Lane wept. Dr. Quinn placed her hands together at her chest. Miles bowed his head, and Mrs. Eleanor Grant, standing quietly at the edge of the wind corridor, simply placed her hand over her heart. She said nothing, because sometimes an old flight doesn't need a declaration. It only needs to be allowed. 2 weeks later at Crown Dynamics headquarters, a new wall was erected. Not glass, not marble, just raw oak, and 27 hand-engraved names, belonging to those who had once been disqualified from aviation programs between 1955 and 1987 for being culturally incompatible. At the top it read, For those who were grounded, but never broken. And beside it, a fragment of silver wing, once belonging to Deacon Grant, recovered from a 1986 technical archive box, now hung beneath a steady light. No longer rusted, no longer hidden. 3 weeks after the commemorative flight, just as the echo in his chest from the ceremony had begun to settle, Elijah Grant returned to Hangar 12 on a quiet morning, unnoticed. No press, no banners, no more rows of guest chairs. The hangar was empty, but not cold. A new wooden sign had been mounted above the old steel door. Grant Jerome Lane Institute of Technical Aviation. Beneath it, a smaller hand-carved line. Every name matters. Elijah stood before the door for 3 minutes, then pushed it open. Inside, the space had changed. Gone were the dusty old Phantom simulators, the rotted storage crates, and the cracks in the concrete wall that once bore the imprint of those pushed away. Now it was a circular room, at its center a practice table, where a turbine engine could be dismantled, or a wing model folded together. Elijah didn't do this alone. He had quietly sent invitations to 12 young people, not from elite flight academies, but from overlooked files, from those once rejected for being underqualified, not aligned with technical vision, undisciplined, or worse, lacking motivation. They came from everywhere: a farm town in Nebraska, a gas station in Montana, a smoky Bronx block, a daycare in Mobile. Each one, a dream that had once been sealed shut. On the first day, they weren't asked to present their credentials. Elijah walked in without a name tag. No title of program director. He asked just one question. How many of you have been told you'd never work on an aircraft? 8 out of 12 raised their hands. The ninth burst into tears. Elijah nodded. Then this is the place where you can start pulling that sentence off of you, one bolt at a time. Over the next 12 weeks, the apprentice room became the first place where people learned to dismantle judgment before they ever learned to dismantle an engine. The curriculum didn't begin with Bernoulli's principle. It began with a sentence printed on the back of every trainee's ID card. Your story is not a deviation. It's the blueprint. Each student received an incomplete airplane model. No manual, no timeline. Elijah gave one instruction. Work on it the way you wish someone had worked on you. With patience, with curiosity, and without assumption. Soon the quiet room began to echo with clicking screws, testing motors, and murmured frustrations like, "Why the hell is this part bent?" followed by quiet laughter. Week 3. Elijah asked the class a question no one expected. If one day you build a wing with your own hands, would you trust your loved ones to fly on it? The room froze. A student named Malik, once expelled from trade school, answered after a long pause. Only if I know I gave it everything I had, and only if I'm willing to stand there and fix it, if it falls. Elijah said nothing. He simply turned on the screen and played the audio from the secret 1975 review, where his grandfather and teammates were removed from the program for not fitting tactical flight culture. There were no visuals, only trembling voices that did not break. Someone in the room wept when the sound ended. Week 5. They were asked to write a letter, not to anyone, but to themselves at 16, to the version of themselves that once believed they'd never touch aviation. The first was by Janelle, who once lived in a car with her mom at age 14. She read aloud, "You're not dumb. No one ever taught you in a way that matched how you think. Now someone is, and you're learning. So stop listening to them." The letters were kept, sealed in a wooden box stamped, "Unlearned Pain," archived for strength. Week 8. Elijah brought in a real airplane wing, 4 meters long, damaged at the electrical core, pulled from Crown Dynamics inventory. He said nothing except, "Fix it." Some students looked confused. "There's no schematic." "No schematic," Elijah confirmed. "Because out there, planes don't apologize for lacking instructions. They just fall." They worked all day, and slowly as the diagnostic light blinked on, every person realized something. Sometimes not knowing is exactly what makes you learn more than anyone else. Week 10. Each student was asked to design one improvement. It didn't have to be feasible. It just had to solve something real. One redesigned the exhaust for planes near residential zones to reduce noise. Another drafted a stress response interface for overwhelmed pilots. One Asian American student invented a facial expression sensor for early detection of high-risk passenger behavior. No one graded them. Only feedback was given. Elijah said, "What doesn't exist yet might be waiting for you to invent it." On the final day, there was no graduation, no gowns, no diplomas, only 12 people, standing, one by one, each saying a sentence they had never dared say aloud before. "I was kicked out of class for talking too much. I used to hide from the lab because my hands shook and people laughed. I didn't think I was worthy of touching anything with wings." After each confession, Elijah handed them a silver wing, a replica of the one his grandfather once wore. No one clapped, but everyone understood. This was not a conclusion. It was the first time they were allowed to begin as what they truly were, worthy students. On the back wall of the room, Elijah mounted a new wooden plaque. No names, no photos, just one line, hand-carved. "The room you were waiting for was also waiting for you." Not every room is built to look out at the world. Some are made to turn inward. And sometimes that's the only place where you don't have to prove you deserve to exist. 10 months after the apprentice room opened, Elijah Grant stood silently before the west wall of Hangar 12, where he had just requested a new window to be carved. Not for the light, but to look out at the old runway, where his grandfather once stepped off a plane. not knowing it would be his last time in uniform. He didn't say a word. He simply touched the newly installed glass, etched along the window's edge. Every beginning deserves a witness. Today was the first day of the second cohort to enter the program. 23 people. No two the same. The youngest was 16, the oldest 42, a former serviceman who'd lost faith in engineering after being dismissed from a hiring panel for being outdated in technical literacy. Elijah hadn't chosen them by GPA, only by how they answered one question. Has anyone ever told you that you shouldn't work on airplanes? If yes, the door opened. If no, they were kindly shown somewhere else. This time, the apprentice room had more than work tables. Elijah had installed a circular mirror in the center of the room, not overhead, but at chest height, so that each person, as they bent over their work, could see themselves. Beneath the mirror was a line: the technician, the thinker, the testimony. Week 1, he didn't teach engineering. Instead, he led each student on a walk through the hangar, pointing to unsealed cracks, to the rotted bookshelf that once held old flight maps, to the bench where Zachary Lane used to sit at night, rewriting erased records. Elijah told them everything, not with flair, not for drama, just one sentence at the end. You are learning in a place that was once considered not worth teaching. Week 4, Elijah didn't show up, not for rest, but for a purpose. He took a train to Ohio where a small museum was being dismantled due to lack of funding. In a stack of decaying papers, he found a journal. Manual of Grounded Wings, Deacon G. No one knew it existed. Inside, handwritten notes in violet ink, full of misspellings, yet precise in every technical detail. Elijah brought it back. He didn't digitize it. He didn't rewrite it. He placed it in the center of the classroom. Beneath it, a wooden plaque read, "They didn't teach him, so he taught himself." Now we learn from him. Week 7, a student named Eliora dropped a wing model she'd been building. It broke into 3 pieces. She froze, panicked. But Elijah didn't scold her. He only asked, "The first time you got something wrong, who was there to help?" She stayed silent. Elijah sat beside her, picked up the pieces, slowly. "Then today I'm here, to help make sure you don't mistake being wrong for being finished." They repaired it together. It wasn't perfect, but it held better than before. Week 12, Elijah hosted a flightless simulation. No tech, no software, only stories. Each person had to describe a flight they had never taken. One spoke of wanting to take their mother on her first trip out of state. Another recalled the wish to fix an old toy plane, one his father secretly kept after he dropped out of school. When it was Elijah's turn, he said, "I want to fly into my grandfather's memory, to tell him, I found the wing that was taken from you." At the end of the course, there was no graduation, no robes, no diplomas. Each person walked out of the hangar alone. No one followed. Outside, they found a laser printer and a simple sign: "Print what you want people to remember about you, someday." One printed, "I wasn't picked, so I learned how to choose myself." Another, "Engineering doesn't start with books. It starts with someone patient enough to teach what you didn't know." Elijah stood still for 2 hours, reading each page. Finally, he took one printout and pinned it to the innermost wall of the apprentice room. It had no name, just one line. "The room used to be silent. Now it listens back." 1 year later, the apprentice room had been replicated in 3 other cities. No franchise, no corporation. Each location chose its own name, but they all kept one symbol: a small silver wing, not to be taken home, not sold, not photographed. It was only worn by those who had failed and chosen to return. And when Elijah Grant returned to Hangar 12 after months of expansion, he entered the room, now softly lit. But no one was inside. Only a single sheet of paper lay at the center table, and on it someone had scribbled, "I know my grandfather was never taught how to fly, but because of his grandson, I've learned how to keep others from falling." And maybe what Jamal fixed that night wasn't just a $38 million jet. Maybe he helped repair something much older, much deeper: the belief that dignity can't be determined by age, skin, or uniform. If this story moved you, if it made you angry at what was almost lost, Hopeful about what can be reclaimed, or grateful for those who carry legacies forward without asking for applause? Tell us,